And welcome back to another edition of the I Prefer the 80s and 90s Sports Podcast editorial where I talk about why I, Richard Harris Jr., prefer the sports of the 80s and 90s to today. The other day, I was listening to a discussion about why there has not been a repeat Heisman Trophy winner since Archie Griffin won his Heisman back in the mid to early 70s. And personally, I think there's a lot of reasons why there has not been a repeat Heisman Trophy winner. And I think a lot of it has to do with the media, and a lot of it has to do with the evolution of the game. See, in the 80s and in the 90s and in the 70s, the Heisman Trophy Award pretty much went to the running backs. In the 80s, I think it was Doug Flutie that won, Vinny won, and I think Andre Ware won the Heisman Trophy. And Flutie got his because of the Miami game, the Miami play. Vinny got his because Miami was a juggernaut. And Andre Ware led the most ridiculous offense in college football at that time, history. Houston was just lighting everybody up. But every other year in between, it was running backs. Running backs ruled the roost. And it's funny because I did a blog a few weeks ago where I was talking about why officiating college football kind of gets a pass and NFL football kind of gets a pass because the game is going through a phase where it is throwing the ball more. And so officials have to be in better positions to call pass interference. They got to be able to see things that they probably don't see because it's happening so fast. As opposed to with the running game, you focus on an area, you focus on a position. In the NFL, and I think in college as well too, they have referees behind the play or behind the offense so they can see certain things better. And so they still get a lot of calls wrong, and they could call holding on every play if they wanted to. But football was so much more simpler than it is. And then what happened was the University of Miami showed that college football can evolve into pro style football. And they threw it a lot. They ran pro plays. They had pro style players, and they just completely showed college football that you don't have to run it all the time. And they had decent running backs, but they had better receivers. And so it just was coincidence, I think, that in the 80s and 90s, that one year you'd have Herschel, the next year you could have George Rogers, the next year you'd have Barry Sanders, Charles White, Marcus Allen. Like, there was a different running back, it seemed, every year that outplayed the previous guy. Because Herschel, and also what happened too in the 80s and 90s and in the 70s, and still has happened, there's never been a freshman to win the Heisman Trophy. And when Herschel came out, Herschel could have won the Heisman Trophy as a freshman because he was that special. And so there's kind of been like, it's kind of in the media's decision as to why they don't give out back to back years because they could have easily on more and one occasion. But the college football media is, I don't know what the right word is to describe it. I'm not saying that they are influenced, but they definitely are influenced today by what is being said about the game. For example, everything sort of starts with the SEC in college football. The SEC is supposedly the superior football conference in college football, and so therefore you look there first to see if they have somebody who is having a breakout year, and then you trickle it down to the rest of the nation. Because there have been years where there's been some players in other conferences that have had great years, but an SEC player, because of what he said or did, won the award. I mean, Oklahoma's had some amazing quarterbacks, and they have, I don't think they have a championship to show for all the quarterbacks that won Heisman trophies that played for them. I don't think Kyler Murray won one. I don't think Baker Mayfield won one. They had, what was his name? Sam, not Sam Darnold. They had, I forget his last name, but he was a quarterback for Oklahoma who was really good, and I'll look him up as I'm talking to you. And then they had this guy White who was unbelievable, and Ryan White, I think his name was, and they didn't win. They got blown out by USC. Sam Bradford, thank you. I mean, sometimes it's just sort of you watch and see something and you say that's just the best I've seen. Tim Tebow wasn't the best player in college football. He just was the best winner at that time, and he just willed his team to win games, and it got him a Heisman. I mean, and a national championship. Plus, also back in the day, the voting for the Heisman Trophy, it seemed to fall before the championship games of certain conferences. So if a player had a great championship game, you couldn't add that into his Heisman candidacy. And also, some players didn't make it to the championship games of their conferences. Barry Sanders, Oklahoma State, they didn't have a great record. He just ran all over everybody in college football. So there's no exact science. It's just, I think it's a flavor of the month thing. I think last year Williams got the award for USC because there truly wasn't anyone who was better. I mean, Bryce Young had a good year for Alabama, but they had some untimely losses that cost them games. And I think that's one of the dumbest policies or stipulations or criterions for Heisman Trophy winners. Like, if you lose a game, you lose your spot in the hierarchy of the Heisman, even if it's not your fault. But there's been some Heisman Trophy winners that have won the Heisman when their team has not been great. I think Archie Griffin's second Heisman Trophy Ohio State wasn't that great. I think when he won the first one, I think they were like 10-1 and didn't. They were third in the nation. I think Barry Sanders Heisman Trophy year that they played in the Holiday Bowl, and that's like you know one of the earlier bowl games, not one of the big games. But for the most part, if you keep winning, you keep your name in the Heisman running. And that's why it became a quarterback's award because all the people who were winning the Heisman as quarterbacks were leading their teams to 12-1, 13-1, 14-0 to great records. And so it didn't matter if you were sensational at another position, your quarterback was the one who was the face of the particular teams. And it's kind of funny if you think back to the winners, you think back to Cam Newton, for example. Cam Newton was all that and everything for Auburn the year he won. Marcus Mariota, the year he won, he was a show within himself. Chris Winkie, but Florida State had sick players on that team. They had receivers, they had everything on that team. But he was the point guard. He was the field general. Charlie Ward, when he won his Heisman Trophy. I mean, there are definite years where the quarterback is everything that the team has. Eric Crouch, he had the big runs. He made the random throw in a game. I mean, he did certain things in games that made you say that was the Heisman Trophy winner. But each season, you're supposed to start afresh, start new, and give everybody a chance to win it. And I think sometimes the media goes into seasons and they already have their mind up made up who's going to win it, who they're going to be voting, and all he has to do is stay healthy for a year, and his team, goes 11-1, 12-1. They can lose one game, they can't lose more than one, and the one game they lose, he can't look terrible. Caleb Williams lost 2 games this year. The Notre Dame game, he threw a bunch of interceptions, so obviously they're not going to let him win it, even if he runs the table against the rest of that schedule that they have. But Bo Nix, he's got a loss already this year. But he didn't lose because of Bo Nix. Bo Nix drove his team into position to win the game, and the kicker missed the field goal. Now today, Washington plays USC, and if Penix Jr. plays really well and loses, he'll still be in the running. I mean, I guess another word I'm saying is, you can lose the award if you play like crap and lose, but if you play like crap and you win, people kind of give you the benefit of the doubt. But I think what makes the award to repeat so much harder today is that on every team's schedule, there's a game. There's one game where if you play lights out and it gets the national attention, that puts you in the running, and all of a sudden people start saying, wait a minute, he did this, he did that, and therefore he should be in the running for this award. And the irony of it is they're usually right. They're not wrong. And so that's why the Ohio State Michigan game is big every year. The Alabama LSU game is big every year. The Washington Oregon game, the USC Utah game, Oklahoma Texas game. Every team has a game on their schedule that the nation watches. And if you perform well in that game, people say, that's the guy. And if you play in a conference, a big conference, Power Five conference, and you navigate that schedule, some years the quarterback. I mean, I don't know how Deshaun Watson never won a Heisman Trophy. All those years at Clemson, I don't think too many people were better than he, but he never won a Heisman. Lamar Jackson had a game against Florida State that put him on the map. And all he had to do was perform the rest of the season. Ty Detmer, when Ty Detmer won his Heisman Trophy, all he had to do was beat Miami. And I'm saying like all he had to do, but he beat Miami. And it was unexpected. And nothing he could do for the rest of the season could screw that up unless they lost multiple 10 games, 5 games. Or he played so badly in the games they lost. And they didn't have a great record, but he won the game. So it's been hard to repeat because somebody does something like that. I mean, Ty Detmer wasn't the best player in college football, but on that one Saturday, they beat Miami, who was like this invincible team. Florida State Miami game back in the day was a big game. And if you played very well in that game, you got credence, you got the attention you needed to propel you for the Heisman Trophy. So to answer the question that was asked yesterday, the reason why no one has repeated as Heisman Trophy winner since Archie Griffin is the nation's eyes are wider open now. Everybody has a game in their conference or out of conference where they can show who they are and why they should win. And if they show who they are and why they should win, they usually get a chance to win the Heisman Trophy. And the pool is bigger. That's all. I mean, yeah, Herschel Walker come out of nowhere? Absolutely. Bo Jackson came out of nowhere. Barry Sanders came out of nowhere. Sometimes it happens. Doug Flutie, here's the funny thing about Flutie. Flutie put himself on the map with the game against Miami and the games that he played against other Big East teams. Reggie Bush. Reggie Bush jumping over people, doing flips and stuff, getting into the end zone. Put himself on the map. Troy Smith was boring, but he never lost. And then in the game in which he had to show out, he showed out and beat Michigan. That's why I say it's an inexact, weird science because you look at a team like Georgia. Georgia has won 20 something straight games. They're a two-time defending national champion, but nobody on Georgia has ever talked about winning the Heisman, even though they have the best tight end in the country. But he's now hurt. But all Georgia does is win. But nobody is ever talked about in the Heisman discussion. That don't make no sense. But if Drake May or Quentin Ewers from Texas, they play well. They're in the Heisman Trophy discussion. But nobody from Georgia. I love college football because every week is a season. I love college football because the introduction to talent, to players that we've never seen before, or ever heard of before, is real, and it makes the game exciting. There are players on every team across this country that are legends in their towns, and they all play together on Saturdays, Thursdays, Fridays, Tuesdays, and try to beat the other legends from their towns. And somewhere out of that pool, there's one person who gets voted as the best player in the land of all the legends. And that's why it's hard to win back-to-back years Heisman Trophy, because they're all legends. Every single one of them. And they all have to have that one moment. They all have to have that one game where everybody can see why they are the best in the land. I don't think in my lifetime someone will repeat as Heisman, because one week, like I said, is a season. And if you lose that one week and you look bad in that one week, you get eliminated. It's worse than survival of the fittest, because sometimes they're not your fault. But this year it won't happen. Caleb Williams won't win it again, no matter what he does. But guess what? I'll keep watching.